Welcome to the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John Tulac.
Everyone, and welcome to Professionals of the Inland Empire / Professionals in Enterprise. Either way, the acronym ends up being PI. So since we've resumed our broadcasting of new episodes after a short break for the summer, we are alternating the Professionals in the Inland Empire format, featuring two professionals in the Inland Empire who are living and working there and offer great services for you, the business person, with our politics and policies approach, which is Professionals in Enterprise. So today I'm welcoming back a guest from episode 32. You might want to make note of this, episode 32, and go back and watch Jana Spruce in action for Professionals of the Inland Empire, as she is an amazing woman in business. She is an aeronautical engineer. She has had a hugely successful career, not only in aerospace, particularly space, but also in business consulting. So she is a really, really smart person, also one of the funniest and most entertaining people that I know. So it's really nice to welcome her back to the podcast. So whether you want to call it pie or pie, sit back and have a slice of pie, because we're getting into it. So welcome back, Jana. And how are you doing?
I'm great, John. Thanks so much for having me on again. Always fun to get a chance to chat with you and see what kind of banter we can come up with for folks here.
Who knows where it will go, but I know where it's going to start. It's going to start with the fact that you are a new author with a great book called Spruce's Home of the Brave. And it's described on Amazon as a playbook for any parent, caregiver, or educator to bring families closer together. And any business person with a family, I think, needs to read this book, let alone anybody else for that matter who's a parent. So we're going to talk about your book today. So tell me how this came about. Talk about how this all came together first.
Yeah, thanks, John. As a successful business person, I was leading teams. As a consultant, a lot of the things I was looking at with, what makes a team successful is really the culture of that team. And so being very focused on that within companies, where we shape culture by the awards that we give out, the celebrations that we have, the stories that get told. That's a lot of what really shapes the culture within a team at a company. And so I thought about that, really from as a mother of 5, how do I intentionally shape the culture at home? And, the obvious thing when you look at it is holidays. That is American culture. That is, something that's on the calendar on almost a monthly basis, an opportunity to talk about our history, to talk about why that holiday is there. What are we supposed to recognize? What are we supposed to acknowledge with that particular day? And to build those traditions and things around it that really help it stick for the kids. And that's, the stories that we tell, the questions that we ask them, right down to the particular foods that you eat. I think I realized it's actually better if you have the same mashed potatoes every year at Thanksgiving, because it sticks with the kids and it makes it really just glue it that much more into your memories. And so as I realized, I was a little bit unique maybe in doing this. A lot of our holidays had been sort of washed out, watered down through the culture, and the culture wasn't teaching the values. So I was trying to do that at home. And when I realized I maybe was onto something, I thought, well, I should write this down and make it, a very actionable kind of playbook almost for other parents to try to do the same.
I mean, it is the narrative that the theme that carries it through the book is all about the holidays, but it's really more about virtues and values, and using the holidays as a way to inculcate that. I don't get to use that word very often, that in your children, which I just think is a phenomenal idea.
It really is. And I mean, that was what a lot of those holidays were intended for. Let's recognize our presidents and what great men they were, to, George Washington walking away from power, or, the importance of, and some of them I found some creative things as I did some research. How do we then work in things like entrepreneurship, grit, those things that we see as sort of these fuzzy American values, but how do we talk about them with our kids, and how do we make a habit out of that so that there's that opportunity to tell them the stories, emphasize and say it out loud. Hey, these are our values. These are the things that we think are important in our family and in our home.
Which makes a whole lot of sense because that's the role of the parent is to train, to educate, to inspire, to share the values and do so in a way that those good values stick for life.
Yeah, our holidays shouldn't be just a decorating theme, what color candy you're supposed to buy this month or, how you swap out the pillows, I mean, those things are all great and they help emphasize it, but that's not what the real takeaways should be for the kids.
Right. I mean, certain things you just kind of go with the flow sort of thing. So I had a holiday message when we took a little break for Christmas season, and I did what was about 12 or 13 minutes talking about holiday desserts from cultures around the world. And I'm getting really interested in trying to sample all of them as I'm reading out these descriptions of desserts. That certainly is more in tune with imparting values than the three most feared words for parents come Christmas Eve as they're trying to get everything together. Some assembly required.
Yeah, definitely, and there's balance that we should have throughout the year as well. Every holiday shouldn't be about giving to your kids. One of the things that I made sure to point out in the book is you have an opportunity, even though the season leading up to Christmas is kind of crazy for most parents, right? There's parties going on, there's shopping to do, there's cookies to bake, there's all this stuff, but really making sure that we recognize that, and the church calls it Advent season, right? It's that season of waiting, and the kids are on edge and they're waiting for Christmas, but take advantage of the times you have to really step back with the kids and just look at twinkle lights on the tree, and be quiet and be calm in the middle of that chaos, and make sure that you're recognizing that is a part of the season and that is a part of the learning as well.
Yeah, that's the idea of pause or sanctuary. That it's a time out to relish a moment and just be in it. And I can remember as a kid, my mom was fabulous at decorating, and we had this white tree with red balls and the garland, the tinsel that hung down with one of the brand new things, a color wheel. And I could just sit there and let my
Yeah.
eyes glaze over and just let the world come all into the color in this, and it was just a great experience.
Yeah, and we should take advantage of those things and make them, you probably remember it even stronger because it was a year after year thing, right? It wasn't a different tree every year, it was the same tree. And you still have fond memories of it and can remember every detail of it because in the quiet moments, you sit and study it. And that's teaching kids to be observant and, recognize and appreciate things. So that's great.
Yeah, as Yogi said, you can observe a lot just by watching, and we don't take enough time. Of course, I used to. That was one of the ways I helped my daughters understand life. Is like, what did Yogi really mean by this? And so they'd have to decipher the Yogiisms, and that was a tradition in our family. And you have five fabulous kids. They all have distinct personalities. They are all strong. They are all hugely successful, not only in terms of academics, but in terms of career and in terms of talent. That doesn't come just from within the kid. That comes from the parents.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that we also acknowledge that everybody has their ups and downs, right? Everybody has their rough patches to go through, and a lot of what really determines your own happiness is, being loved and having some work ethic and some grit and some ability to push through difficulties to, find positive things along the way, right?
Exactly. And I'll never forget having a conversation with your oldest. Em was, I mean, she was a phenomenally talented singer, and she enjoyed musical theater at Claremont High, and she was really, really good. She stole every scene. But I asked her, I said, "Are you thinking about a career in Broadway?" She just looked at me and says, "No, not possible." She says, "I can't dance. I don't know how to hoof it, and I don't want to learn. I'm going to go be a business major." I mean, that's a level-headed, sensible young woman talking.
She's very good at that. But the funny thing is, I think that, you know, just like so many other things, learning to sing and learning to be on stage taught her so much about how to present herself, about paying close attention to the words. When they're teaching you, in voice lessons, they would have her sit and, read through the words and circle the words that are important, like, so you can bring the right emphasis to that as you're singing it, which only helped her when she went on to, study for the LSAT and eventually sit for the bar. It's that same process. It's that same attention to the words, to the details, to what's actually being said, as you mentioned, with your kids too.
And just to round off her story, she aced the bar exam, got a clerkship with a judge on the Texas Supreme Court, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I mean, that's about as top as you can get. Great way to launch a career in law. Evan was also a good scene stealer in musical theater. I wonder where they got that from. Just say it out loud.
All right.
So let's go to, you had picked two holidays because they're upcoming. So let's talk about how you work with Labor Day and with Columbus Day. So let's start with the one coming up first, and that's Labor Day.
Sure. Yeah. Labor Day is kind of one of those holidays that it's like, is it barbecue? Is it a 3-day weekend? Like, what are we actually doing here? And there was, summer was coming to an end. This was several years ago. And, the kids were all at home and school had started, but there was first big holiday, right? 3-day weekend coming up. And one of my kids was like, why do we have the day off? And I was explaining Labor Day. And so one of my first graders at the time said, so let me get this straight. We celebrate workers by taking a day off from work. I said, yeah, pretty much. But that's the sassy kids that I have. And, so we kind of would talk through those things often surrounding holidays, just understanding what the day is about. And, I think that as I did more of the research and understanding a little bit more about Labor Day, I realized there's so much more to it that we could be making sure to talk about with our kids. Labor Day is considered, a little bit of a, celebration of the worker, right? Which is great. And at the time that they actually instituted Labor Day, there was already, if folks who are familiar with history will know things about like the Haymarket affair, where around May 1st, there was a big protest in Chicago. Several people died. It was a big thing in the news at the time. And it was very much associated with socialist agitators. And, there was a socialist sort of labor's, day around May the 1st. I thought it was interesting as I did some research that our Congress specifically chose not to align our Labor Day with the International Workers' Day on May 1st that was so closely tied to socialism. So they were distancing themselves, on the calendar from that idea. And I thought that was really interesting thing to note that, we weren't aligning ourselves with sort of that ideology and that, because it's very seen as very un-American at the time. So, our Congress picked the first Monday in September to celebrate that instead of May the 1st. And I think that, in talking it through with my kids, I emphasize, there's good and bad from unions, right? During the Industrial Revolution, a lot of working conditions were very unsafe. There were 12-hour days, 7-day weeks. You might have had to buy everything from the company store, told them sort of those stories about how a lot of workers found themselves not really ending up with any paycheck because you actually had to buy everything from the company, based on future wages, and, that those were a big problem. And I also had mentioned, child labor laws, and that, it was a good thing we didn't have children working in coal mines anymore, for example, their age, which, always kind of sticks a little bit with the kids when you talk about that.
You could be here. Yeah.
Exactly. So those things really kind of sink in when you start talking through them with that, but also highlighting for them that, fast forward, and there's been certainly times where unions have garnered too much power, and they've really had negative effects on the companies because they start to, that power imbalance between those groups can be difficult. And so we kind of turn that into a discussion about how, too much concentrated power in any one group is generally not good. And turning that back around to, socialism and our distancing ourselves from that, great time to highlight for your kids that, communism has not worked. It's been tried many times. And actually, I think it's helpful to point out to the kids that communism, without counting anybody who's died in a war, just through famine and political persecutions and those things, over 100 million people have died under communist rule. So, it is very important. If you care about human rights, if you care about, people and their living conditions, you got to keep in mind that concentrating that kind of power in any one group is never good.
Stalin and Lenin and Mao were no friends of the worker. It was an ideology that, from a philosophical standpoint, just seems so reasonable, and in practice is absolutely horrible wherever it's been tried. And, of course, we still see it in North Korea, which is simply an autocracy, and in Cuba, which is more of the same. These are not workers' paradises.
Right, and I think it's helpful for kids to understand some of those things, and give them those examples of, like one of the great ones is the story of the teacher who said, well, I'm just going to give everybody the average grade, so everybody thinks like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then, towards the end of the semester, nobody's passing because the kids who normally get A's realize they're not getting an A if they're getting the average for the whole class, right? So those kinds of stories, I think, are helpful to make it a little more understandable for kids what that really means, that you're taking away a lot of the incentives for people to make their own choices, to have more if they want more. Some people don't want the kinds of jobs that might pay more, but if everything pays the same, how are you going to get somebody to do that? So there's definitely a lot of opportunities, to talk about that. But it's funny, the things that you end up with, fast forward a little bit towards, I think maybe it was that same year around Christmas time, one of my kids, one of the twins, was talking about getting, an Xbox Live subscription or something. And he then started saying, well, I'm not sure if I could make the payments, every month. And I said, oh, you're worried about your cash flow. And his twin brother said, yeah, thanks to Woodrow Wilson, we can't get a job. So, it's my first grader.
At least he knew who Woodrow Wilson was. That is real progress. And so, the typical kid doesn't understand who our presidents are.
It was a little bit of a proud mama moment, I'm not going to lie, but, and they still, now they're older, and they still, for a while complained about, the difficulties of finding ways to earn a little extra money, other than mom's chores. So,
well, Wilson's reputation has certainly taken a hit in recent years compared to how historians used to rank him in the pantheon of presidents.
Yeah, well, he's not very high in my kid's book.
Yeah. Okay, so we could talk for a long time about the importance of learning history and of course understanding how our government's supposed to work, what federalism is all about, things that aren't taught in schools, or they're taught but they're not required classes, and so students don't take this stuff, and so you wonder how they turn out as voters. But we spent a lot of time on that. Let's take a look at Columbus Day.
Yeah. Columbus Day is a
chapter.
Columbus Day is a great one that I've always enjoyed, just from the exploration point of view. As you mentioned earlier in the podcast, I've got a lot of experience in the space industry. So those stories and ideas of, that challenge of the next frontier, I think is really interesting to me. And Columbus certainly was that. It's fascinating as doing a little research to find out he was self-taught in navigation, in geography, in astronomy. He didn't have the internet. He didn't look it up on a YouTube video. He had to go to a book, himself. If you could find a book, because there weren't libraries everywhere. So, you think about what a challenge that was for him. And what a fascinating entrepreneur, right? To say, I'm going to take a shortcut. And everybody says, you're going to sail off the end of the earth. How did he convince people that, that he had the right idea, that this was true, that not only should they give him a bunch of money to go try it, right? Just like any entrepreneur now who's got to maybe raise some capital to go try out their idea. But just like entrepreneurs of today, he's got to get a bunch of people to get on a boat with him and attempt to sail off the end of the earth, or rather, find that shortcut to India. So, to me, I think talking through some of that with kids and, what that must have been like is pretty fascinating as well.
I remember Richard Armour's skewering of world history and American history. He was a humorist. He spent his last year, quite a few years actually, at Pomona College, and unfortunately passed away before we moved to Claremont. I would have loved to have met him. I just loved reading his stuff as a kid. But he had an illustration in his world history skewering. It said Columbus could not convince the king and queen that the world was round even after showing them an egg, but it showed a fried egg on the ground. It's like, okay,
yeah.
the demo failed.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't realize either about Columbus Day was, that it's a very strong cultural holiday for Italians in America, more so on the East Coast. I grew up in the Southwest and in California, where, you don't really get as much of that flavor as you do, I think, in kind of the Northeast. But it was interesting to read a little bit about that and understand that, something that kids probably don't recognize so much today is the level of discrimination there was against Italian Americans for a while in our history. In 1911, one of the things that helped to kind of spur the idea for Columbus Day was there were 11 Italians. Sorry, this was 1891. There were 11 Italians lynched for being Italian in New Orleans. And so that's something that we don't often hear about, but they did face quite a bit of discrimination at that time. And so the Knights of Columbus, which is a very, connected with the Catholic Church and a very, faith-centered men's group within the Catholic Church, they push for Columbus Day to also be a day of pride for Italian Americans, to really embrace that heritage and have a day to celebrate, being Italian, which is kind of cool, and it's a great excuse to eat some Italian food too. So I like to work in the, the music and the food to go with those holiday traditions as well.
Well, I always thought that Columbus fit with the original Star Trek, to boldly go where no one had gone before. He and the other discoverers of that era took all those risks. They took serious chances because the maps that existed were poor. Even the ones that were sort of mapped out, like around Europe and Africa, left a lot to be desired. And they were sailing westward with no idea how big and round the world actually was. And of course, he got it wrong at the beginning. He's like, "I found India." No, I didn't find India. Well, I found something, and I'm going to keep it.
Well, that's a great lesson for the
said,
kids.
"Hey, wait a minute. What about the Vikings? We were busy pillaging, and we found it first."
They didn't come back and establish commerce, though, I guess.
No commerce.
So
that's a business lesson here. I mean, the Spanish Empire was an empire for quite a while, but was so mismanaged ultimately that it failed.
Yeah.
But it was the biggest empire since the Roman Empire, until the British Empire surpassed.
You could also point out that, hey, Vikings might have had first mover advantage, but a lot of people say that first mover advantage isn't so much of a thing. There's really a second mover advantage. So, once somebody else has kind of gone there and started to figure it out, you come in behind, you can take advantage of a lot of those lessons.
Pioneers take far more risks than farmers do. The farmers come after the pioneers have found where, there's new land here. And the ones that come back.
For our kids today, right? Our explorers are going to be going to the moon. They're going to be going to Mars in the not too distant future. So, thinking through with them, what might that take, for you to board a ship that you hope makes it there and much less comes back, to leave your family behind to go and explore and go somewhere that no one's ever been before is pretty exciting and inspiring thing, I think, for talking with your kids about. I have one of the ideas I shared in the book that is fascinating to me is, talk to your kids about what would they miss if they weren't on the planet. And we have a little bit of a hint there that astronauts have said what things they miss when they go spend extended time, for instance, on the space station. They miss things like the sound of birds.
Oh, yeah.
Wind, wind in your hair, because everything's perfectly still up there, right? You're locked up in a tin can of sorts. Another thing that was fascinating to me that the astronauts talked about was they missed like the smell of coffee in the morning. So if you can't sit on the space station and hold your cup and, smell the wafting, lovely steam coming off of your cup. But actually somebody went and designed a cup that would hold the liquid in. It's a funny little shape, but just so that they could sit and smell their coffee or their tea as they're drinking it. So, necessity is the mother of invention, I guess, but it's amazing what people can come up with.
Yeah, so that's what when they come back is what do you do when you get out of your isolation? What do you head for first? After you say, you know what, I miss gravity too. Let's start with the primary items.
Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them are like, man, my back pain was totally gone while I was in space, and now I'm back here and dealing with that again. But so yeah.
So let's bring it full circle because we could go through every chapter, but then we'd have to break this up into several episodes. The book, I think, is something that and every parent would benefit from. But this is a business show, so let's kind of work our last bit of time together, focusing on the connectivity between the business world and the family world, and how this book helps the business people, which can be a mom and pop operation or just one or both working in different fields.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is being intentional with your culture, and that's true both at home and in business. One of the things that I've worked on both within my own teams as well as with companies I do consulting with is how to build the positives of your culture, and finding those ways that might be similar to things that you hear in the book, right? What are the stories people tell about your team? You can learn a lot just from having a new person come in and ask what those stories are, and then feed them back. Those are the things that really stick with people. You can create some of that by celebrations that you have. What do you celebrate? Do you celebrate the end of a design review? Do you celebrate reaching a certain level of sales? And how do you do that, and what do you talk about in that process? Those words you put to that and the symbolism that you can design around it can really make it that much more impactful for the folks on your team.
And the business culture, which is shared by the older engineers and execs with the newer ones, that's an important part of the continuity of any business to be effective. And one of the things I know that happened in aerospace as it left Southern California is it created a real gap. There was literally a whole generation of engineers lost. And so a lot of the older engineers really hung on instead of retiring because they wanted somebody to pass on what they knew to.
Yeah.
Ending my sentence like Churchill would.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. We do as humans have a craving. That's again part of those seasons that we go through. We get to a point where, man, I have struggled to learn this lesson. I want to pass it on and teach it to someone else, and they might have to struggle with it too. But I want to be there to help make sure that it lives on and people don't have to start from scratch. So we continue to move forward. And so having those opportunities within your business teams to make sure you're mixing it up, right? Sometimes it's great to have a team that's, all the young, scrappy guys who, have a lot of energy and are willing to try things. Sometimes you can inject just one advisor who brings just a little wisdom, and can maybe the right ones are often really good at just asking questions, right? What will happen if we do that? They can sometimes just slow the eager younger folks down enough to think about the right things before they move forward. I've seen that be really successful.
And as Edison would certainly say, he never treated any experiment that didn't work as a failure. Is it, what did I learn from this? It was always optimism, always positive, always moving forward. And I think that that's something also that can be, taught to young people. It's like, don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid that something didn't
Yeah.
work out. Explore, be curious, be creative, and dare to fail. This is how we learn.
That's a big theme in the book for kids, but I actually did that with a team that I was working on. We were tasked with doing a prototype of a spacesuit. We had a very short amount of time. We had to assemble all of the components that would make up that life support system in the backpack of a spacesuit and prove that we could get it all working in a very short amount of time. We had a fairly young team, which, as I said, was great because, kind of they didn't know what they didn't know. They were willing to try things for the most part, very, very enthusiastic group. But I did kind of notice, as a part of that team, that there were people that were maybe afraid of being wrong, and I think that happens a lot, particularly in engineering cultures where people want to be smart. They want to be seen as, the smart person, the one who came up with the right answer. And sometimes that holds them back from trying things. And so what I did with this team was I walked in one day and I brought a brick that I, grabbed from the side of my house or whatever. And I came in and I set it on the conference room table and I said, okay, guys, this is the brick. And, kind of like in basketball, when you have a really bad throw and everybody goes, brick, right? Didn't even hit the rim. It's sort of a symbol of failure, right? You screwed that up, right? And I said, so what we're going to do is this is an award for whoever fails but learns something. And so, when we come across those things where we've tried something and now we know that doesn't work and we're not going to waste time on it anymore, we're going to celebrate that. And, whoever is able to do that gets the brick for the day or however long, and they set it on their desk until the next person. And, my team just all looked at me like I was crazy. What is she doing? Why is, there's a brick on the conference room table. She wants to celebrate failure. Didn't make any sense. So they all kind of made a face and then they went back to their work. And the brick sat there for a couple of days maybe. And, but eventually our electrical engineer, he didn't use his wrist strap, when he was working with one of his boards and fried the board. And he says, okay, I guess I get the brick. And he stands up and he marches over to the table and he grabs it and everyone started laughs a little bit. And then it was magic, John. Almost all of a sudden, it became okay to fail, to not get it right on the first try. And we said, hey, good job, Aaron. Now you're going to be more careful with your, wrist strap or, whatever. And other people started picking it up after that. And it started to move around the room pretty quickly. And it did its job. It got everyone a little more comfortable with sticking their neck out and, trying something new, which was the whole point. But it's amazing how something small like that, just to bring attention, just to highlight the thing that you want, the thing that is going to benefit the team through something physical, through, some laughter and some clapping, we kind of turned that around. Whereas I think, on the track they were on, they would have moved a lot slower and maybe gotten stuck much more easily.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot to be said. It's liberating to own your mistake, name it, show it, and learn from it, and move on. And you can internalize all that, but a lot of people, when they internalize it, they just keep beating themselves up.
Yeah.
But if you externalize it, you can get, you could get some laughter, you could get some sarcasm. You say, "How could you do that?" But then you could also get the empathy, because it's like, that could have been me, and I don't know that I would have been strong enough to admit it. But the admitting part of it, and here's what I got out of it, it can be absolutely liberating. There's not enough time to tell this story about what happened to a young fire captain when something went terribly wrong in disposing of some fireworks, but and they exploded and caused such a bad fire that engines from 5 different cities had to put this fire out. So he's standing at a rigid attention with his team, and they stood for quite a while. And finally, the senior guy said, "Did you learn something from this?" And yes.
Yeah.
At that point, nobody could hold it anymore because what happened was so absurd. Especially when you're looking back at, like, how could we have not seen this happen? That the whole place just, at the guy's funeral, and the captain told the story. The whole church full of firefighters just laughed insanely for 10 minutes
Yeah.
because it's like in that kind of situation, you have to know that you make a mistake, it can be fatal to you or to your team. So you do surface your mistakes,
Yeah.
and everybody learns from them together.
And one of the things that we teach in my engineering teams, and that's important to teach to your kids, right? The quicker you try the hard things and fail and learn, the more time you have to get it right. So if you put it off and put it off and put it off until the end of, especially if you got a schedule to keep, you wait till the end to design the thing that is the hardest. You don't have much time to mess it up. But if you give yourself that permission and start on that in the beginning, that's how successful teams are able to move much faster.
Yeah. Procrastination really slows you down.
You're right.
Well, Jana, I really want to thank you for being the guest on our show again today. It is always delightful to have you talk about anything. And this, I think, is so important. And for young families in particular, looking at the road ahead, this is a roadmap. This helps get you started in a way that really can give an advantage and say, you're not alone out there. So thank you again for being a guest on Professionals of the Inland Empire / in Enterprise. And we will be back with another episode next week. So long for now.
Thanks for watching or listening to, depending on the case, the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John W. Tulac. If you have a suggestion for a guest, email him at jwtulac, that's JWTULAC @gmail.com. jwtulac @gmail.com.